Morning, everyone. Welcome to our Think Big series brought to you by PSG. My name is Henriette Senecal, and I'm the Chief Executive for PSG Insure Short-Term Administration. As a leading financial services group, PSG's got an extensive national footprint in South Africa and a presence in Namibia. We've been in operation since 1998, and we pride ourselves in providing a bigger picture approach to our clients' financial needs, from asset and wealth management to short-term insurance. We are an advice-led business backed by some of the best financial advisors in the country. The Think Big series is a collection of dialogues with high-value speakers hosted by the award-winning financial journalist Bruce Whitfield. Each topic will address burning issues which are causing South Africans anxiety in these uncertain times. The series aims to empower our audience with factual evidence to formulate their own opinions and manage their expectations on various aspects of how the current situation could unfold. In today's webinar, Bruce talks to Bronwyn Williams, a trends translator and future finance specialist for Flux Trends. Bronwyn has a decade of experience in marketing management and trend research, working predominantly with brands in the financial industry. Prior to working with Flux Trends, Bronwyn worked as the publisher of the South African office of the Agora Group, one of the largest independent financial publishing houses, headed up by the international New York Times best-selling author Bill Bonner. In this role, Bronwyn managed the largest circulation of the South African financial newsletters and worked closely with a network of local and international financial thought leaders, giving her access to a wealth of insider insights on how the world of money really works. We look forward to her insights. Follow us on our social media campaign, #ThinkBigPSG. This series is free, shareable, and open to anyone interested, whether or not you're a client. Bruce, of course, needs little introduction, so over to you, Bruce.
Henriette, thank you very much indeed. Bronwyn Williams, our guest, with a good introduction, so we don't need to do that. Bronwyn, for most of us, we can't see tomorrow right now. How on earth do you see a future beyond next week? Because as a futurist, as somebody who looks at trends and what is likely to transpire in the future, whatever that means, how on earth do you do it?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is that in the midst of periods of accelerated change, like we're in right now, we've got every crisis you can imagine is all compounding at the same time, social, political, economic, health, you name it. There's a lot of chaos and noise in the system, particularly in the short term. So your short-term trends and forecasts get completely thrown out the window. However, if you then are able to zoom out a little bit and give yourself a bit of perspective, what you see is that firstly, the long-term macro and meta trends are still very much in play, the same directions that we're going on, the same old problems we've always had, things like inequality and sustainability. All of those trends are still happening. So that's the first thing to realize. If you're able to zoom out, you can see actually a bit further ahead if you focus on those underlying core trends. And the second thing is to realize that crises tend to accelerate your smaller trends. They tend to accelerate and amplify changes that were happening anyway. So there's plenty of examples of that, everything from sort of movement to remote work or to homeschooling. You can look at all of those. But all that's happening is that those ideas that have been lying around get some airtime and some space to pop forward onto the screen, and suddenly we start living in this future we've been talking about for a very, very long time.
I think it's a 1970s comedian, I forget who it was, but it's like, if you worry, you die. If you don't worry, you still die. So why worry? Do we take that philosophy?
Well, a little bit. I think that South Africans probably err too much on that side. We are experts at change and at chaos compared to the rest of the world. South Africans have lurched from one crisis to the next from the 1960s. You can even take it back further in time, right up until today. So we've kind of adopted this attitude of we'll survive, we'll make a plan, we'll carry on, we'll get going. And that gives us a bit of an advantage over perhaps the more sort of staid rest of the world who is used to perhaps less tumultuous times on an ongoing basis. However, there's also a catch there in that South Africans can become also sort of complacent about change, because there's a fine line between having a resilient mindset to say we can survive and we can make a plan, and to becoming just sort of defeatist and reactionary and say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it anyway, so, you know, we might as well just sort of watch the sunset, because what can we do to change it anyway? So we have to be careful about slipping into that sort of defeatist attitude. But at the same time, I think that being comfortable with chaos is a bit of a South African advantage compared to...
That comfort is dangerous, as you say. I mean, it's a case of, things always work themselves out. I mean, yes, we come to the brink, and we come to the brink often, whether it was 1976 student uprising, whether it was P.W. Botha, whether it was the Rubicon speech, whether it was the debt default of 1987, whether it was this deeply uncertain transition from the Nats to the ANC between 1989 and 1994, P.W. Botha had his stroke, F.W. de Klerk came in, Chris Hani was assassinated. We were in a period of unbroken recession almost for about 3 or 4 years. It was horrible. But then Nelson Mandela came and told us everything would be all right. And so it is, and it's fine, and we win Rugby World Cups. So, you know what, we can do anything. And the complacency that can breed is what we have to guard against, I think, is your point.
Yes, so we do need to guard against the complacency of being sort of just accepting what's going on in the world, and rather than being proactive about changing what's wrong. So rather just accepting all the crises as they come and just saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it, we carry on. But I think there's another sort of angle to that we can fall into a trap, and that is focusing on just surviving the present. So we sort of sit in the survival mode, and there's been psychologists who have said that the majority of South Africans are walking around with some sort of form of post-traumatic stress disorder, because we're living in this high tension, high crime environment all the time. And that tends to make us very sort of navel gazing, or shoe gazing, as I like to say. So we're very sort of stuck in the present, and we don't often raise our eyes a little bit further to the horizons to say, how are we actually going to change this? Because when you're so busy surviving, how do you then plan about what comes next? And that's where the opportunity lies, because the future, as I love to say, is it's uncolonized. It's a competitive advantage, because so few people are playing in that space. Everyone is dealing with today's nonsense.
I want to get in an uncolonized future, because I love that. I saw that you wrote something about that the other day, and I really want to get into some of the meat of that in just a little bit. But you talk about we've got to try and change the future. We've got to change. I mean, can we change the future? Can we as individuals, as little cogs in this incredibly complex machine of 7.5 billion people, each with fears and aspirations, living in countries with fears and aspirations, in a world that is more fearful than it's been for a long time, we talk about changing the future, or do we have to adapt to a future that we can't yet see?
It's a bit of both. So I know that's a terrible answer, but the truth is there are very, very few people who have any sort of concept or any sort of solid plan for the future. And you can talk about this from an individual basis, or from a corporate level, or from a societal level. There's very few nations and people and individuals who are planning much further ahead in the next election cycle. And that's why that space is white and blank and uncolonized and ready for new ideas to populate it. I think that's an interesting conversation too, because what 2020 has done is it's revealed how few ideas we have had lying around for the crises. You know, that's that famous Milton Friedman quote, you know, like crises sort of bring those ideas lying around to the fore and give them a chance to actually be lived. And what has astounded me is how few of those ideas are around. So the sort of ideas that are around is sort of, oh, universal basic income or helicopter money will save us all, or print it and they will come, you know, modern monetary theory for everyone. You know, these are sort of ideas that we have, and they're very defeatist ideas. They're very nostalgic ideas, which is about the whole thing of saying today is as good as it's going to get. It's like nostalgia, but for the present. So saying the future's not going to be great, so let's just recut the cake a bit more, because we definitely can't grow a bigger one, which are very small ideas. They're not very exciting ideas. And I think that what individuals tend to forget is how powerful ideas are. And if you think of the sort of ideas that have changed the world, the ideas that have become memes, they've come generally from people coming out of nowhere. So look at Marxism. I mean, that was just an idea that a guy had in the library, and he wrote it down, and it's infected the world, for better or for worse, whatever your political leanings are. It's one of those ideas that was lying around and got its chance in last century's crises. And it shows that those ideas are powerful if you can get people to buy into them. But it also means that you have to be able to paint a picture of what comes past the current chaos. Because right now, you can't see very far ahead when all the short-term trends are going crazy, and when there are no rules and the points don't matter and the stock market's going up even though the economy is going down. It's very hard to see in the short term. But if you are able to broaden your perspective to look ahead sort of 5, 10, 50 years into the future, there's very few people doing that. There's very few people painting a picture of a world that is going to actually be one that you want to live in. And I think a lot of the conversations happening today are very, as I said, nostalgic, saying this is as good as it's going to get. Let's just go into maintenance mode. Let's sort of give everyone that UBI, print that money, make sure we kick that can down the road, but this is as good as it's going to get. If you are able to paint a picture of something that's actually better, you're going to find a huge audience willing to listen to you and to buy into those ideas, because people are so hungry for any sort of leadership, for any sort of plan, or any sort of vision of a better world. And we can even see this in the sort of literary space, because literature tends to be a bit of a lagging indicator about where sentiment is. So it's usually about 10 years behind how the general discourse is thinking. And what we've definitely seen is how books, particularly in the sort of science fiction realm, have gone from being very optimistic about the future, about, colonizing space and about, flying cars in the sky, which is where we were 100 years ago, to now all science fiction is sort of dystopian and talking about, sort of end of the world. That's a very depressing future. I mean, if you were 18 and the sort of ideas that you're being shared are like, you've got to live a smaller life than what your parents had because, we've burnt all the carbon, so you can't have cheap energy, and, and we've spent all the money, so you're going to have to pay our debts, that's not a very exciting future. Those people are hungry for anything that's going to say your reality can actually be better than your expectations, not the other way around.
How much of that future expectation, that future that we see, is influenced by the now, by these things, the fact that we're so surrounded by negative news and misinformation that there is no way that we can actually really decipher what is actually going on in the world? How much of a threat is climate change? How much of an opportunity is climate change? For example, the risk and the threat of pandemics into the future. We'd always kind of known a pandemic would come at some point, but it'll be in the future. So that's far away. It's okay. Suddenly it's here right now. And we're bombarded with so much of, what do you call it, the nowism, and it's a much clever word than the nowism, but we're so busy living in the present that we cannot raise our heads. How do we decipher a future, look through the noise and look through the chaos? Because essentially, people who are truly successful, people who are entrepreneurs who build businesses for the long term, if you talk to any of South Africa's great entrepreneurs for the last 30 or 40 years, they've got a couple of things in common. And one of those things is a relentless optimism. And that relentless optimism isn't a blinkered view of the world. It isn't it'll all be fine view of the world. It's just we can make this world better. We can solve problems that improve society. And if we can do that, then not only do we make money, society gets better, we create a sustainable future. That optimism is so important.
Yes, absolutely. The optimism is huge, and that's probably the biggest lack we have. And once again, I think that's an advantage on the South African continent side compared to, say, a lot of the more developed world, especially as I like to say that word developed, the ED on the end means it's sort of finished, right? Whereas developing is still in progress. So we should have more optimism than your sort of older aging populations across the world. And we shouldn't be sort of infected by those developed world sort of navel gazing problems of saying we have to sort of now reap what we've sown because we've got less young people to actually build a future for us. And I think that we spiral into that quite quickly with technology too. Technology has gone from being something we were very hopeful about, if you look at the sort of narrative in the world, to something that they're all the big bad guys, like look at the and what's going on in the world right now with the antitrust cases with the very, very big tech companies. And we talk about saying, oh no, they're doing more harm for society than good. And we've become very, very fearful of what is really essentially progress. And I think that that's perhaps also a destructive narrative to be talking about. We should be talking about what technology really is. Any technology, from the first day that the first guy made the wheel, that rolled across the Stone Age plains, what technology is doing is about doing more with less. So that's a pretty worthy goal, right? I mean, that's actually quite sustainable. It means that we can sort of push those boundaries of our limits to growth from a sustainability point of view, and we can redistribute more wealth at the bottom end of the scale too. But we can't see technology and progress as being a net bad. And I think that's a terrible tragedy if we are telling people that technology is the problem and not the solution. Technology is just a tool, and it's about how we harness it to go forward.
But people are scared. What scares people, I mean, as people were scared of as Ned Ludd and the Luddites were scared of the loom in Lancashire and went around smashing the loom with hammers and crowbars and things, in the same way as when people, the guy who invented the spreadsheet, for example, thought he was going to put bookkeepers out of business in perpetuity. And he actually had deep angst about creating the spreadsheet. But all technology has done repeatedly through hundreds of years has improved outcomes for humanity. We look at the way in which we're communicating right now. We look at how we've been so severely disrupted over the last 6 months of our lives. And you think of this COVID-19 that happened even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't know how we would have coped. 5 years ago, a couple of people would have bumbled through. They would have been able to go stand on their roof with a pitchfork with a dongle attached to it and attached to their laptop. 10 years ago, they would have maybe still had a modem or whatever the case was. This crisis has hit at a time where technology has been able to cope and has been significantly advanced in order to help us through this crisis. Surely that helps us understand the power and the usefulness of technology as a tool.
It absolutely should. And yet, if you look at the narratives going on in the mainstream media and across social media, we have a much darker, much more dystopian view of these things. I think that's a problem. I think that's why we need to have these conversations to remind people that technology is just a tool. And especially things like information warfare that you're talking about, or misinformation, that's a reflection of the things that we were saying and doing anyway. Social media is more like an amplifier, mirror, and magnifier of who we are. It's not creating misinformation. It's just sort of revealing us what our social problems are, which I think is also quite an interesting conversation. We tend to blame technology as just a dumb tool compared to the actual very real humans going on below that. I think that brings up another interesting point as to where sort of competitive advantage goes into the future. And that is, there's that old adage that says the margin is in the mystery. I like to say rather the margin is in the mess. It's in the irrational human side of the world. Because in a completely automated, technological driven world, whether that's fully automated luxury communism or fully automated luxury capitalism, if machines are running all of that, all the margin gets taken out of the world, right? Because that's what margin is. A margin is a competitive imperfection, isn't it? I mean, that's what basic economics will tell you. And where does that margin come from then in that world? It comes from irrational, warm-bodied human beings who have unexplainable needs and desires. And that's the more exciting way to think about technology. So leave the robot jobs to the robots and leave the human, irrational, messy stuff to the people, because that's where the real value is going to come from in the future, in the gray areas, in the imperfect information.
And that is, in that imperfect world, then it leaves the opportunity set, because while 99% of people are living now in the panic, social media driven chaos, fear, mainstream concern, worry. It's all going to be ending. This is as good as it ever gets. There is actually a small proportion of people who go, okay, now here comes an opportunity. And not in an evil way, not in a James Bond villain sort of way, but in a way that says problem solvers are actually the people who create opportunity. Bill Gates solved a problem. We were moving towards a computer generation. Nobody could see computers. People, some of the brightest people of that generation were saying, yeah, maybe 4 or 5 computers in the world and that'll be fine. Nobody envisaged an era where we'd all have laptops with cameras, with microphones, with connectivity, with this ability to connect via this thing called the World Wide Web. Somehow, people with long-term views, people who can see through the noise, see these futures, these positive futures that the rest of us simply don't. How do we build that level of resilience to be more like them? We can't be them, but how do we get more like them and less like what we are?
I think that's firstly a good point, the whole thing that all businesses essentially are in the business of solving problems. The more problems there are, the more opportunities there are. And we've certainly got a lot of problems right now. So fortunes are made in downturns. This is a great opportunity to start a business or start something new if you're able to solve a problem, particularly when everyone's a bit cash strapped. That's a huge sense of advantage. But I think that looking a bit further ahead, which is really my role, is to try to think about but further down the road, we need to also start questioning what are we building and what are we making? Because there are really a couple of different business models you can see in the world. You've got a lot of these platform businesses that are sort of sucking up all the value in the marketplace at the moment. I mean, you can look at the US stock exchange and how those sort of big 5 tech companies are going up while everything else is going down. They just seem to be getting bigger and bigger, which makes some people very worried. At the same time, just a bit of a disclaimer there are limits to growth on all sides, and the bigger the giants tend to collapse in and of themselves. You know, if given enough rope, they tend to hang themselves. So we shouldn't worry too much about that whole sort of monopoly thing. But at the same time, we have to look at the sort of business models that are getting built, because there's some business models that are about extracting value and creating sort of toll gates to extract wealth from the marketplace. There's other businesses that are in the business of creating value. And that's generally a message we talk a lot about with our businesses that we work with. And I mean, even if you go back to the days of sort of Adam Smith, the sort of rent-seeking businesses are the bad men. And like whether you come from a capitalist worldview or from a socialist worldview, a rent-seeking business extracts value and concentrates value in unproductive hands rather than in productive hands. And it tends to not distribute wealth, but rather to hoard wealth. And I think that what we're seeing quite a lot now is a lot of the very, very big businesses are platform businesses, which are essentially rent-seeking, toll-collecting businesses. We sort of have a danger of working into the sort of new rentier economy. I know people usually call it the sharing economy, but you just sort of turn it over and look at its underside and you see that it's really creating rentiers of both B2B businesses and B2C consumers, because it's essentially collecting a toll from every trade that takes place. So I like to say, don't build your business on a platform if you are going to start something, because what the platform gives, the platform can of course take away. And you would have seen that with what's going on with, say, Airbnb and Apple at the moment, where Apple is saying that any trade that takes place on the iOS operating system, Apple wants a commission from it. And of course, the irony is Airbnb is itself a platform business that extracts a rent from both property owners and from the people that come and stay in their properties. But I think that what we tend to forget about is those businesses sound great from a VC Silicon Valley sort of, pump the money in and we all retire young and rich, all the rest of it, with all that wonderful big financialized money going on in the world. But those businesses aren't really productive. They're not creator businesses. They rather sort of accelerator, magnifier platform businesses, and the opportunities on the other side.
Aren't they also, though, great enablers of real productive businesses? So they may be rent-seeking, but they are great enablers. If you look, for example, at the great South African example of an Uber-type business, and that's Aisha Pandor's Sweep South. She's one of those evil people now. I've seen her differently now that you put it that way. But Aisha's created a platform with her husband, Alan Rubich, and what they've done is they've facilitated the employment of 20,000 women in Sweep South to do domestic work on their terms, at their price, where they want to do it, when they want to do it. It's the biggest democratization of domestic work in South African history, and it's an industry that desperately needed a little bit of give and take. They've also now started Sweep South Connect, which again is one of those rent-seeking businesses, but it's connecting tradespeople, whether it's plumbers, and it allows the checks and balances of security and skill to be tested as well. I would argue that they're great enablers. They're not all evil, surely.
No, I'm not saying they're evil at all. I mean, I have the heart of a capitalist. I have to be quite honest over there on which side of the field I sit. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Nice work if you can get it, right? However, there's a catch there, because those platform-based businesses are essentially rock star businesses where the winner really ends up taking all and you only really see the top of the pyramid. So those business models are simply not available to everyone. And yes, they are enablers of trade, but they're enablers of real economy businesses. And if we've got too much cash chasing the toll and not enough sort of investment chasing the actual businesses or the actual workers on either side, the ends of the two-sided economies, the buyer and the actual creator, the seller going on, then you have a very hollow economy. So that's why I'm saying those platform businesses can tend to eventually sort of collapse in and of themselves when they become sort of too big and there's nothing left on either side to either sell or to connect. And I think that the opportunity right now in the world is to actually build those businesses that can be connected on the platforms, the businesses that actually perform the trade, the individual that actually does the work, the person that makes the thing that is sold on your Amazon or on your Apple platform or whatever the case may be. I think we tend to focus too much on those very few, very big platform businesses, and not enough on the fact that, most of us are not that. We're not those sort of lucky people that got to invest in, in Google 10 years ago. We didn't all get to go back to the future and all of that. There's a lot of work to be done on either end. I think that we tend to focus too much on the middleman in the market, and not enough on the ends, not enough on actually solving the problem and connecting with that end consumer, with the real people that have been sort of separated by a lot of this. I think it's more of a understanding that we need both parts of the market. You can build rails, but you still need someone to actually put the car on the track. And perhaps we don't have enough people actually building cars and putting them on tracks, because it's so sexy and wonderful to think about, how can I build a platform business and get lovely VC funding and get a lot of money, retire young and rich, as I said. But we can't all do that. Some of us have to actually roll up our sleeves and do the work.
Okay, so let's then roll up our sleeves and do some work. Let's focus in on South Africa. Let's look at the future of business and entrepreneurship. A horrible word, it's French anyway. Let's look at the future of small, medium, and growing enterprises in South Africa, the opportunity sets that exist. Two companies started at roughly the same time in 1987 in South Africa. 1987, possibly the worst time ever to start a business. You talk to GT Ferreira and you say, when you were thinking about starting this First Rand thing, and I mean, surely 1987 was the darkest time in history. That's not the best time ever, because people were divesting and people were selling off and people were panicking and throwing their keys at bank managers, and it was horrible, but geez, it was fantastic. Robbie Brosen, young man at the time, had hair, and loved chicken, and he and Fernando Duarte bought Chicken Land, and they started Nando's. 900 stores, 20 countries today. A young man called Brian Joffe, chartered accountant, buys a business called Chipkins, and that's the seed for what is Bidbest today, and Bidcorp, which is the global food services businesses. Terrible times to start a business. 87, what a disaster. What were they thinking? And it's so interesting, isn't it, in the fullness of time, as we sit in a crisis right now, which is insurmountable and which is surrounding us and which is overwhelming us, and it's frightening, how this could be the moment 30 years from now that was just phenomenal. Or is that smoking my socks? Because I like to do that from time to time.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, when everyone else is panicking, if you are able to, as I said, look ahead a little bit further down the road, I mean, that's just wide open space ready for you. The real human problems don't go away, and our basic human problems that can't be just solved by technology are those sort of skinny parts of the pipe in the system, the blockages, and that's the sort of human limitations. We have real bodies. We have to actually eat food. We have to have electricity, if Eskom is kind enough to provide it or not, so those are sort of problems that we can actually, if we start to solve them properly, that's real building. And that's the sort of difference between, say once again, coming back to sort of platform businesses, which are about they're horizontal businesses. They're about speed. They're not necessarily about depth. And then you've got different businesses that are, like you said, the builders, who actually build things that are more like vertical businesses. You can think of them. They're thinking about building outposts into the future. And I mean, obviously Elon Musk, because he's got South African roots, we always have to talk about him. But he's an interesting character because he's plowed his own money that he's made from his sort of financialized sort of platform-based businesses into real businesses now, into real things, into energy, into transport, and into getting outposts into space. I mean, that's an intergenerational vision. That's an exciting goal. It's a lot more exciting than building the next sort of connector of buyers and seller platforms, right?
He's living the science fiction dream that you were saying people were talking about 30, 40 years ago when he was a kid growing up reading science fiction. He is now following that science fiction. And so that's aspirational. And the last place I want to be in the solar system, thank you very much, is Mars. And hopefully we never as a species have to go there, but at least we'll have an option. And what's so exciting about what people like him do, the great visionaries, whether it was Edison with his 10,000 prototypes before he got to the light bulb, is that they're incredibly persistent, is that they're incredibly dogmatic, they're obsessive. They might not be very nice people. You might not want to have them around for Sunday lunch often. Once is interesting, twice maybe a bit of a burden. But thank goodness there are lunatics in the world, and we need them. And in South Africa, I think, we need a couple of like-minded lunatics, people who are willing to challenge the status quo, people who are willing to say, the future doesn't have to be what we fear it might be. It could be something different.
Yeah, exactly. And talk about building businesses or having visions that are about creating new things, not just about sort of making the things that we've already got work faster. And I think that's an interesting conversation between the sort of difference between volatility and sort of, velocity, which is one is about sort of noise and speed, and the other is about sort of speed with direction. Like what comes next? I mean, once we've sort of optimized all the current trade routes that we have using our fantastic platform businesses and all the rest, and we've optimized all that sort of friction out of the system, then what? Then what do we do next? What are we actually going to be buying and selling next? What should we be doing? What are the problems we should be solving? And what are the sort of the big, audacious, ridiculous goals that we can have as to what comes next for humanity? Because I know Peter Thiel tends to talk about that. Like if you actually go back to the 1970s and how your grandparents grew up, if you sort of take the screens away, what has really changed in our lives? We still sort of sit in traffic to go to work. We still sit around a dining table that kind of looks the same. Like our lives are sort of, the future has been democratized since then. So it's been distributed wider. But it hasn't actually changed though, has it? We've sort of sped everything up, but where have we gone? And that's probably the question in terms of, that's where the opportunity comes in. That's where your Elon Musks with their sort of pointy man toys, sort of like have some sort of idea about what comes next. And those people become very, very popular. They become celebrity businessmen. They become successful because there are so few people with any vision for the future other than what we don't want. There's lots of people talking about what we don't want. Oh my goodness, we can't do that. We've got to stop all these tech giants from getting too big, and we've got to deal with all this dystopia. Plenty of people talking about limiting our horizons. There's very, very few people that have any sort of clear picture as to what could come next. Let's leave the question of what should come next. There's plenty of tech ethicists out there. I mean, there's a plague of them across the world right now that'll tell you what should not be done. But who's coming up with the visions of what could be done? What comes next? Even coming back to Elon, he's just really fulfilling the science fiction dreams of the 1920s and 1930s from the old sort of world shows that they had back then when they still thought about the future, 100 years in the future. When last have you had a conversation about what the world's going to be like in 100 years' time that didn't involve climate destruction, which is pretty much the only vision we have for 100 years from now? What comes next? Who's talking about that? No one. Let me tell you, if you're able to paint an exciting picture, you will find followers. We have no long-term leadership around us right now.
Yeah, and that is the point. I mean, populism is destroying the future, but that's a discussion for another day. Talk to me about how we colonize the future. In South Africa, decolonization is what we're focused on, but let's think of colonizing the future. I quite like this idea of saying, okay, 10, 15, 20 years from now, how do we stake a claim in that space as South Africans?
Well, it's virgin space, so it's there for the taking, and I think it's incredibly important that the African continent, and because we are South African, let's talk about South Africans, do claim that space in the future, because like it or not, Africa is the future. It really is. I mean, the rest of the world is aging. They're pale and frail, and they're getting paler and frailer, as they go through time. Africa is the future. By the end of this century, 1 in 3 people will be Africans. That's where it's going to happen. And what we need to be sure is that we're going to have our own African vision for what the world is going to be like, because we're going to go into the African century, much like you might say we're currently sort of in the Asian century that's got that whole sort of youth bulge going on right now. And we need to be very, very careful that we are going to own that space, that it's not going to be colonized by someone else. So I'm not saying we should colonize the future. I'm saying we should probably democratize that, but it is open space. No one has staked a claim in it yet. You can't claim the future until you get there. But what I'm quite concerned about is we don't have enough people talking about what that could be. We don't have enough visions, enough voices. We have too few ideas about what 50, 100 years from now could be. And I think my challenge for Africa is that our demographic dividend window opens up in 2050. That means we've got 1 generation to get it right. We've got 30 years. We've got 1 batch of kids that we have to get sorted out by then. Otherwise, we're headed for a very, very dark future. Because the last thing you want is a continent with the youth bulge where you've got no productivity, no growth, and the best idea on the table is sort of universal basic income. Please, sir, can I have some more for everyone? That to me is absolutely horrific. Surely we can do better than that. A UBI for me is a last resort, bottom of the barrel future.
So what business opportunities then exist for South Africans sitting, watching us here today, to say, all right, so there's a scenario, there's a good scenario, there's a blimmin' terrifying scenario, the democratic dividend, the demographic, there we go, let's get it right, the demographic dividend, or is it the demographic sort of
disaster?
Disaster, thank you. Helping me with my alliteration so early in the day. What is it? I mean, what are the things we can do? If we look at some of the great businesses that are starting up right now, they are payments businesses which facilitate digital interaction for small businesses. And you've got players like Yoko, for example, which are growing exponentially at the moment. You've got people like Stacey Brewer, who are growing a fantastic private schools business in South Africa at the same sort of price that the government spends on educating kids. Stacey is doing it with outcomes that are considerably better, but she's got 20,000 kids in her school. We need 200,000, 2 million kids getting that education. The opportunities to create the generation of kids who take the African future to a positive path is surely where we need to be focusing our energies.
Absolutely. So if we want to look further ahead, we've got to look once again at those sort of macro trends in play. If you want to spot the big problems that can become big opportunities to solve. And I think that the ones that I definitely see on our continent that we can be looking at would be energy, food, and education. So education is the base, and we are getting education horribly wrong. So I've done quite a lot of research on that in the last few years, but we spend more money, we get less return on our investment. We're thinking about it all wrong. We're creating generations of children who think that succeeding is going out and getting a job, becoming a job taker, not becoming a job maker. Imagine if we spent 12 years at school teaching children that by the time you leave this program, if we put you on, you will be self-sufficient. You'll be able to make jobs for yourself or for anyone else. Like, isn't that a bit of a mind shift we can do? We need to get that right. That's the sort of the basic base level. If we want to get the future right for Africa, we have to fix education. We probably shouldn't be using the models that are being used on either the East or the West. We probably need a much more Africanized example that will be focused on solving our own problems. And then in terms of business opportunities, I think solving energy and solving food security going forward are huge opportunities for people to build real businesses that have an impact on the real world, not just on the financial sphere, because there's a massive disconnect between businesses that make money and businesses that actually change lives, which and the ones very interesting from a personal point of view, but the ones that actually change lives are much more interesting from a societal point of view. And those are the businesses that will be around in 100 years' time. It won't be sort of eaten by the next batch in the sort of Darwinian cycle that is the markets.
We run the risk of making people roll their eyes going, oh my goodness me, they've become lunatics. But this idea of social justice, I mean, social justice isn't treated as a business imperative, but actually social justice in societies like we have in Africa, in a society like we have in South Africa, social justice becomes a business opportunity. I mean, and not to be exploited cynically, but to see need, to address that need for a commercial gain. If you improve society, surely it's a positive thing.
Sure, I have a different take on that. I think that if you are creating jobs in South Africa today, you are providing social justice. Good on you. You don't have to be a branded social justice business. I think we need to remember that. But if your business follows the letter of the law and is not exploiting people, workers, or not, extorting money from your customers, and not engaged with corruption with government, if you're playing by the rules and you are fulfilling a need, you are creating net good for society. And I think I'm quite adamant on that. I think we need to very much separate this whole idea of a sort of social enterprise from an enterprise. If you're an enterprise, you are a social enterprise. If you're playing by the rules, you're making money, clearly someone thinks you're worth the time, and clearly you're adding value to both your customers and to your employees that you are creating. I think we definitely need more of those job makers. We need to just understand that. It's not about making sure that for every pair of shoes you sell, you give another one to someone else. It's rather about creating a product that adds value to your society. Congratulations, job done. And that's a much simpler way to think about social justice going forward. But I think it's also worth talking about making sure that the businesses that we are getting involved with, we do care about society and social stability, are businesses that actually benefit what I like to call the codependent cohort of our population. Those are the basically otherwise known to everyone else as taxpayers, the people that actually have to work for a living, that do the jobs, that, pick up the socks, that go to work. I mean, there's basically three strata, right? You've got your independent, wonderful, lucky people that have got sort of, trust funds or accumulated enough wealth that they can live off rents without lifting a finger. And there's very few of those people, great for them, but they're not contributors to growth in society. They're just they're sort of an extractor of wealth. They've become that through luck or through hard work. Then you've got the rest of us that sort of have to work for our money and pay the taxes and keep the lights on and keep the economy going. And then what we've got the dependent population, which from a sort of demographic point of view, that would traditionally be your children and your elderly people who live off, the charity of others or through their savings. But what we're getting to is a point where we've got a much larger dependent population that should be part of the codependent population. These are the people that can't find work, that can't create jobs. And that's hugely destabilizing from a democratic point of view. If you've got too many people that don't have a stake in both the upside and the downside of your economy, you've got a very unstable society where people are dependent on the government rather than in charge of the government, which is what the productive working segment of your population should be doing. So if we are building businesses, we need to understand that if we want a stable society, and of course no business can really succeed in a society where politics and crime and violence are like a day-to-day threat. Of course, that's not a sort of a space that you can build a stable business going forward. We need to be sure, or at least be making efforts to make sure that we are bringing more people into the productive, the skin in the game side of the economy rather than the left behind segment. And I suppose that's where my bugbears around things like universal basic income maybe start questioning how stable that is for societies going forward. Surely we want a participatory economy, not a handout economy going forward. And are you creating jobs or taking them?
Thank you, Mrs. Thatcher. Sorry, did I say that? Sorry. It's very Maggie Thatcher, but the point is she was absolutely right. Britain in the 1970s was a disaster zone. Is Labour working, I think, was the payoff line that dreadful man Lord Bell came up with in those days. So, okay, we've gone around the world. We've gone at a hell of a speed, and everyone's going to have to go download this again and watch it again because there are 1,000 great ideas. I need you to take those 1,000 great ideas, please, Bronwyn Williams, and distill them down into three things. What are the three most important things as we sit here in a time of deep tumult and uncertainty and social discomfort and a real worry about the future? Three things to make us value creators and not to sit on the sidelines and wait for somebody else to fix the problems that need urgent repair.
Well, I think we start with that same point again. Like, are you making jobs, or are you taking jobs? And you can think about that from sort of personal point of view and from a corporate point of view. The second point would be to come back to that question of value. Are you a value extractor or are you a value creator? I think this is a very important point, particularly for people that are working in salaried jobs right now. If we're looking ahead, technology, I do believe, is a net good for society as long as we are able to obviously use it responsibly and be kind and not treat people like things, rather just treat things like things. But when we look at the sorts of roles, the sorts of industries, the sorts of jobs, so whether you're looking once again at a corporate scale or individual scale, the ones that are at risk of automation are the roles that extract value from the system, cost centers rather than value centers. So that might mean that some tasks you are doing in your current job are cost centers. They create friction for your employer or for your network or for yourself. And those jobs will end up being automated. So don't sort of build your future around cost centers, build your future and invest in the sort of skills and the sort of personal development that is on the value creation side of the economy. Same with businesses. Middlemen businesses, platform businesses, they're great for connecting everybody, but ultimately the margins for competitors come from those, once again, those rent-seeking businesses. They become vulnerable to future attack. Businesses that are in the business of being middlemen and of extracting tolls, rents, value from supply chains are at risk of being replaced by either by automation, by tech startups, by someone else. And the middlemen we've got now, those big platform businesses, will be replaced by something even leaner going forward into the future. So try focus on value creation rather than on value extraction. And then once again, when it comes to technology, try and leave tech jobs to the robots and human jobs to the people, because I do believe that that last point, that value or margin in the future is in the mess. It is in the irrational human components. It is in the sort of warm-bodied connections we have. We are still just naked apes running around clinging onto our rock, our third rock from the sun. And then that's not going to change anytime soon. As much as we can talk as futurists about sort of sugar cubing your consciousness into the computer sphere, that's not going to happen in our lifetime. So if you want to be successful, think about that and try and lift your eyes to a further horizon, because that future is uncolonized space and it is there for the taking. There's very few people that have any positive visions for any date beyond even 2030 at this point in time. So over to you.
I need a lie down. Bronwyn Williams, thank you very much indeed. That was a very, very good trip around the sun in a very short period of time. Thank you, Bronwyn Williams, very much indeed. She is with Flux Trends with PSG, is Henriette Senecal. If you dare, Henriette, intervene in this conversation.
Thank you, Bruce and Bronwyn, for that insights. Value creation is definitely such an important part of the future of business. And Bronwyn has shared your views that there's just, so much information flung upon us in the 21st century. And really, how do we digest all of it? We have to edit data outside of our immediate scope of interest, not as a matter of choice, but as a coping mechanism, because we are continually forced to prioritize. As a result, the information we rely upon is sometimes incomplete. Our social media interactions are affected. The generation gaps widens. Crucial business opportunities are sometimes lost because of all the information. Too much information has become a real problem. And our clients are exposed to this noise, and this creates uncertainty. Uncertainty about the right investment decisions. When should we act? When to invest? How to plan for this future, how to create value for our clients. All in all, making decisions has become much more difficult. South African is typically working hard for their money, but emotions can blur objective decision making about your portfolio. This takes me to the value of good, untainted, and objective financial advice. In my opinion, PSG's got the best network of financial advisors, both wealth and insure, a network that has been built over many years. Through their expertise, our financial advisors add a layer of certainty to our decision making. If you already have a PSG advisor, I really encourage you to engage with them. They are well equipped to advise you on financial and insurance portfolios. If you don't, please get in touch with us via the events registration platform. We are there to assist you and help you with your decision making. We welcome your feedback. Please communicate with us, and we look forward to our next speaker in our Think Big series, Richard Poplak, an award-winning journalist and filmmaker from the Daily Maverick. Thank you and stay safe.